And I think, begin right away with the launch of this beautiful book that we have over here. And we have to mention that today Vikram is looking quite the bomb in this beautiful Chandeli dhoti. I think we should have him stand up so all our viewers can. Wow. We can have all the different profile views of Vikram. And he's definitely looking no less than the bomb that he is over the cover of this book. I think it's such an incredible representation of Krishna, Lord Krishna, who's also been actually my hero growing up, because he was such an androgynous god. And of course, he was also Krishna, which in Hindi means black. And I could connect very well to Lord Krishna, and I think it's such a sexy representation of Lord Krishna. So yeah, kudos to Vikram for doing that, really. So I think a lot of us Indians usually really fantasize about the growing up experience that a lot of the Indians growing up abroad have. It's thanks to Karan Johar movies as well. I think a lot of us millennials have grown up fantasizing what life is in general abroad. And for Indians to have that, where you're different, what was it really like? Was it as fantastical as we think of it to be?
Well, so it was my experience, and the only experience I have, I guess. So I can't really compare that much, but it was a mixed experience. Yeah. So in many ways, Norway is a very safe country which respects human rights. But growing up, it was also a very, very homogenous and very white-dominated society, and also predominantly, Christian or secular. So one of the stories in Lord of the Senses is called "Growing Up Queer," and that story is quite closely based on my own experience. So maybe I can just read a little bit from that. Shall I do that?
You should do that.
Yeah. So. Here, I think, yep. Masi. So I could maybe say straight away as well that I'm dual heritage. So my mother's family is Kathiawadi, Gujarati, and my father is from Norway, Norwegian, white Norwegian. Masi, my aunt, was religious and the nicest person I knew. When others were angry and fighting, she would remain calm. When she saw a spider or an insect in the house, she picked it up and let it loose outside. Animals have the divine in them and can experience pain like us, she told me. She was vegetarian. I wanted to be vegetarian too. But not just yet. The grilled chicken sandwiches Mama made were just so good. In the cave-like space underneath my loft bed, I kept the idols that Masi gave me. If not a writer, I would become a prophet of sorts. Perhaps both. Mama wouldn't let me have incense and fire there, but I had a bell, and when I rang it, the cave became a holy place in time. Sometimes I invited Tina in too. Once we were going to spend the night in a tent in Tina's garden. I recounted one of the stories that Masi had told me about Ravan, the demon king, who kidnapped the innocent Sita and held her captive. It was very scary and pleasant at the same time. But then the night became darker and more sinister. I tried to explain that Ram and Hanuman, Krishna and all the others were good and strong and always won in the end. But we decided to move into the house for the rest of the night and sleep there just in case. Tina's mother asked what had happened, and Tina told her about Ravan and Sita. Her mother said, I shouldn't make up stories like that and scare myself and the other children. At school, I became friends with John, a boy with big blue eyes and big blonde curls. He asked me whether I was superstitious. I asked what that meant. He told me it involved believing in a special dimension to the world, and in things you couldn't see so easily, that not everyone was, but he was. I said that I was too. We spent much time fantasizing about the journey we would take to India when we were older. We would buy a camper van and drive there together. Soon I spent most of my time with John and less with Tina. One day, she told the others in my class about Ravan and Ram and that I believed in all sorts of weird things. John wasn't there, and I denied it all. Hanuman is like He-Man, I said. They aren't gods and real. It's just a story, stupid. It didn't work. Others in my class started saying that my family probably even ate monkey brains, like in that Indiana Jones film set in India. The next morning, I told Mama I was ill, and she let me stay at home. I watched the Gandhi film that Masi had given me. Overcome with emotion, I cried as Gandhi fought the British. He was my hero. I only wished he hadn't been so thin and bald and worn those strange clothes. So, and look at me now. I'm at least in the outer appearance, hopefully moving towards my hero. But yeah.
Now that you've mentioned about Tina, I think we cannot not mention about Marcus as well. I think Growing Up Queer is one of the most well-written stories of course the entire book is extremely well-written, but I could really well connect to the story that you mentioned of in Growing Up Queer. Could you please tell us a little more about the beautiful boy that Marcus was, or I'm sure continues to be?
Marcus, you've really picked up on that one. Marcus. Yeah, so I mean, Growing Up Queer was, it's loosely based on my own life, right? So, Marcus is kind of based on somebody from my childhood, yes. You want to know where he is now. Is he single? Is he gay? Marcus, are you out there? Yeah, I won't reveal his real name, just in case. But it was there's this small moment in Growing Up Queer, which I also describe, which was this, Marcus is a little bit older, and he's wearing these jeans. It was a very 80s thing. I think these jeans with that were a little bit, that had holes in them, you know, so you could see a little bit of the skin.
Yeah, rugged jeans,
yeah, the rugged jeans, right? So it's a little bit like, you see some of the skin as well, right? And then at some point, I think it was the summer, so Marcus, I described this in the story, he rolls up his t-shirt and he just drums his stomach like that. And his stomach was like really suntanned and like tight, and I was just like,
How cool. I think over in the story, as we move on, I think you've also mentioned about John already a little bit. And then there is a very interesting homoerotic experience that you actually also mentioned of with John. How was it, well, first of all, is John a fictional character, or John is a guy that really exists? So we can look him up on Facebook.
Yeah. So John he's very closely based on my best friend in my childhood, yeah. So, yeah, he's closely based on my best friend in my childhood.
And did his views sink in with yours? Did you ever find it actually difficult making friends who didn't exactly look like you as well?
Yeah, so he was, he was blonde, curly blonde hair, blue eyes, all that, the typical kind of Norwegian thing. But there was something we connected on, it was this like, he asked me, are you superstitious? And this big word, we were children, I was like, what is that? And then he had his own idea of what superstitious was. It was like, to have a sense of something that isn't so easily seen, all that. So we were really connected somehow. And we had these dreams of going to India together when we would get older. So he was really interested in India as well, which so he was meeting me a little bit somewhat on that part of my heritage, I think. Yeah, and then the story, as you say, it also describes this, what is going on there between this main, or the narrator, the protagonist, kind of me then, and John. There is some kind of erotic tension there as well.
Speaking of your heritage, you also mentioned in the book how you go out to a store with your father, and over there the woman at the counter, she doesn't exactly associate you with your father, and I think it's an experience that a lot of us Indians over here can also connect to, because when you are a little darker or whiter or lighter than your parent, many a times you are questioned whether you are actually associated in any way with your parent. How did it really feel to actually belong? I mean, of course you grew up in Norway, but still so distant in some ways from your own heritage.
Yeah, so I mean, so my heritage, I have a dual heritage, right? So I definitely have the Norwegian as well, but I don't look Norwegian. It's very funny because in India people don't think that I look Indian either. So who knows? I don't know what I look like. I look like me. I belong to the world, right? But it was I remember that moment very well. At least this is how I remember it. Our memories are, as we know, they're very, who knows what actually happened. It's a creative process to remember as well. But the episode that I describe in that story is when I go to the shop with my dad and I ask, can I have a chocolate? And he says yes, and he's already put on all the other stuff that we're going to buy. And then I come with the chocolate, and the woman at the till, she's, you know, gone through all the other stuff, and then comes the chocolate, and she says, are you paying for this as well? And she looks at my dad. And then I look at them, and I'm like, doesn't she understand that I'm his son? And then I look, and I'm like, she's white, he's white, I'm not white, you know? I'm different. And that was a very strong kind of, suddenly I felt this distance to my father as well. It was a very, what other people's gaze can do, you know, to a relationship. Yeah.
Speaking of the fact that, I mean, you of course grew up with dual heritage, which means that you were also very much exposed to what was going on in India. And then you mentioned of your hero being Mahatma Gandhi. I'm still intrigued by the fact that how is it that none of the maybe actors or actresses or celebrities, you know, the popular celebrities from Bollywood, did you ever look up to any of them as well? Or was there a hero as well that you know, sort of looked up to or fantasized about ever?
So, I mean, Masi was my, you know, really my female hero, I guess. Very far from a Bollywood character, but, well, you know, she has that part in her as well, definitely. I did watch some Bollywood films when we visited my mother's family in Leicester. And I think in Gold's Gym, in one other story, there's a description of, I think, Sunil Shetty, yes. Yeah? How I have this fantasy of his, like, because, yeah, Gold's Gym is a story that, you know, takes place in Gold's Gym, and there's the main character there is kind of fantasizing, and you don't know what is fantasy and what is actually happening with these other guys or people in the gym. So what is fantasy, what's real? But he notices that, you know, a lot of people there, even the kind of the bears, have now shaved. There's no like body hair left. And he has this thing where he's like, oh, Sunil Shetty, like how he remembered, you know, the hairy chest of Sunil Shetty when he was little, and that whole thing. So, yeah. So, I mean, I did have there were some Bollywood heroes that definitely, it was Gandhi almost, that's Sunil Shetty, you know. So, yeah.
Yeah, cool. And I think...
And then, sorry, can I just say as well, because a big hero for me, I would like to say, is, you know, because the title story is called Lord of the Senses, which is another, you know, title for Krishna, right? And that is about love between Mirabai and Krishna. So, I mean, a big hero for me and an example of brave love, a radical love, is Mirabai. Like, you know, just defying gender norms, defying norms that have to do with sexuality, norms that have to do with caste, religion, and just loving. I mean, love can be such a radical force. And, yeah, and the title story is sort of a kind of a praise for her and that love as well. Is it okay if I read just a tiny part from there?
Yes.
Yeah. You could spend forever looking at him. You would study each detail of his beautiful body, his large eyes, sweet lips, smooth chest and stomach, his nipples, his navel, the curves of his body, the dhoti in folds over his legs, the naked feet on the ground, one across the other, so gracious, so sensual. Sometimes he caught you looking, and he knew what you were thinking, and he knew about the tingling you felt. You would blush and cast your eyes down for a moment, but soon be looking up at him again. You couldn't help but dance. You felt like you were a puppet, and he was pulling the strings. It felt like he was the air entering you and moving your body, your very own breath, your blood and muscles, that's intimate. Sometimes your movements were slow and subtle, other times fast and large. You danced to the sound of your fingers snapping, hands clapping, ankle bells tinkling. You danced like a little girl, clumsily, bursting with joy. You danced like a young woman, seductively, teasing him with deliberate movements, loosening your hair, swaying your hips, slowly removing your clothes, catching his gaze. So that was from Lord of the Senses, a little scene between Mirabai and Krishna. And I write it to Mirabai as a you, right? Because I also think of what is I, what is you, what is she or he. So the reader can also be Mirabai, I think. And when I was writing this, I was listening to Rangi Barse.
Okay. Yeah.
Because that is based on one of Mirabai's poems, right? And I was reading a lot of Mirabai's poems in English translation. And then I had an idol of Krishna on the table, and I was just dancing, you know, and getting into it, like really feeling what is it like, this kind of love. And that's how I wrote that story. It needs to be like, and that's like, I think part of my writing process as well, this kind of like embodied, like I need to get in touch with all the senses, you know, to really write. So writing for me isn't an intellectual thing, it's a deeply spiritual and embodied practice, I think.
And I think it adds a fantastical approach to the book as well when you begin. And the fact that you're starting with the story of Meera sort of makes it very auspicious as well, which is something that we always do in India. So was it like a very, was it a move that you made in complete awareness, or was it something that just happened in like serendipity?
I think it was a very conscious choice to start with that story. It's also, I think, the first line is, I'm pretty sure it is, yes it is, do you remember the first time you fell in love? And that I think it's because the first time you fell in love had to do with God. You know, the first time you fell in love, and then the rest of your life, I don't know, maybe not the rest of your life, but for a very long time we keep longing for something and we try our best, you know, sometimes Grindr, sometimes not, something else. And sometimes on Grindr you find, you know, beautiful moments as well, but this kind of, that was the first love, you know, Mirabai and Krishna, and you are Mirabai, you know?
Beautiful.
So, yeah.
I would really want you to also read perhaps an excerpt from Gold's Gym, because I have something very interesting that I noted in the book, which I'll definitely mention about, but I think Vikram should read perhaps an excerpt, his favorite excerpt from Gold's Gym, and then we'll talk about the perspective that I like the most in that particular chapter.
Facing one of the mirrored walls, 4 muscular middle-aged men are lifting heavy dumbbells. As I discreetly watch their reflections, I bite my lip and sense my cock coming alive. I imagine a different time and place, my body intimately intertwined with theirs like Pilwani wrestlers. They are dressed in sleeveless shirts and sports shorts. Even these almost bears are waxed and hairless nowadays. While I enjoy the unobstructed view of veins and muscles moving under shiny skin, it makes me nostalgic too. I remember the Sunil Shetty films I watched with my parents as a child. His bad acting didn't bother me. I spent happy hours imagining my head resting on that hairy chest, or letting him lift me up and press me to him tight. And then there were Dadima's stories about the Pathans, probably hairy chest too, at least in my fantasies. She said they would come and take children who misbehaved. Even though I later dismissed these stories as unfounded, slightly racist rumors from her own childhood, the little bit of irrational fear that remained made the Pathans more exciting and attractive to me. If Dadima had known that a Pathan would be the first man to fuck me. Yeah, good stop there.
Perfect. So, I think a lot of people don't know here, if you really want to serenade Vikram, just wear a langot. He's obsessed with it. And I think we all have to know what is this obsession with langots.
Come on, it's sexy. Isn't it sexy though?
Yeah.
How can that be associated with asceticism? Like, come on.
Perfect. So what I really liked about this particular this chapter in particular, is the fact that the central character is attracted to very extreme body types as well. And I think now that we're talking about it, it's so important to also talk about representation of the community, of course both in India and abroad. And the fact that the central character finds both these different body types very sensual and very desirable. Was it something that you did consciously, and how is it that you built, when did you actually the nitty-gritties of these two characters that you're talking about?
So what I read out now was mainly this more kind of the muscular, bigger kind of thing, right, daddy or whatever. And then later in the stories, there's twinks and there's all sorts of different characters. Also a lady in Gold's Gym. So it's a very it's this kind of desire, free-floating desire, you know? And I mean, that desire can be very targeted to one particular type. But it's interesting with desire how it can also be very inclusive in a way, right? I don't know, I think we have different stories that create or make our desires go in certain directions. And I think, you know, it's fair enough that we have different preferences and all of that, as long as we don't put too much judgment into our own preference, I think. But I agree with you, I think it's very important to have different representations, also in, I mean, in queer stories, and yeah.
Yes, and especially in fucking Delhi, when the character really like falls for a guy who's relatively chubbier,
Yeah.
and the fact that they still make love,
Mm.
and I think that is what is to some extent an empowered representation of the community, that you could still be any body type or any skin color and still feel desirable in your skin.
Yeah.
And I'm glad that you did that in the book. I think
Yeah.
a lot of us will really connect to it.
Yeah.
We would also have to talk about the cute guy named E.
Okay.
How did you meet him? Or did he exist? Because he's a little closer to us.
Yeah.
He happened in Delhi. So.
Yeah, so fucking Delhi is a story, and there's that double entendre, right, of fucking Delhi. So it starts up with the main character really like hating, despising Delhi, doesn't like Delhi, he's from Bombay. So of course then Delhi is just, it's polluted, it's patriarchal, it's all of that. But then he slowly starts to fall in love with Delhi. And through these different characters. So it's D, and then it's E, and then it's L, so it's different characters, right? So E is one character that kind of facilitates that, like, falling in love. And towards the end, as you mentioned, Anvesh, there's also this chubbier guy, which ends up fucking the main character. So it's like fucking Delhi, but then Delhi also there's lovemaking, which is mutual. And maybe especially like now, since we are in Delhi and with what's going on, I'm very aware of what's going on, and I'm almost like speechless. But I'd like to read just a short excerpt as well from fucking Delhi, because this is based on my own. So some of this, of course, is again based on my own experience, and this scene is based on my own experience. In the middle, taking up most of the intimate space, is Ame Khusro's grave, which looks almost like a bed. It's covered with chadars and strewn with flowers, roses, marigolds, and jasmines. Two young men have brought a delicate chadar with them. I watch as they take one end each and gently lift it into place, as if they're putting someone to bed, tucking him in. I lay some roses on top. The walls and ceiling are covered in multicolored geometrical shapes, floral patterns and calligraphy. There is a lamp in the middle of the ceiling. A fan just beneath it makes the light flicker. Apart from whispering prayers of the few men in here, there is only the sound of the fan. Then I hear the call to prayer. Allahu Akbar. Long A, liquid L. It must be from a nearby mosque. The muezzin sings it beautifully. It almost moves me to tears. The sounds themselves, the sincerity of the singer, the reminder that God is great, the longing and love. So that is also from fucking Delhi. And this is, I think, also about a very deep love. Again, it's like I was saying about Mirabai and Krishna, is, I think we long for this divine love in different ways, and we do our best to kind of fulfill it. And that community that, I also have experienced at the Dargah with the Qawwali music and people of all faiths coming together. It's so, so beautiful, I think. And yeah, I just wanted to give that some space as well, especially now with what's going on in Delhi.
I think spirituality also forms like a fundamental layer in a lot of your books. What are your really views? Do you think you are also religious, or has religion played any important role in your growing up days?
Yes, so definitely. So my Masi is a very religious person, very spiritual person. So she influenced me a lot, I think. But I think there's also something about my temperament. I've always been a very seeking, longing person. So ever since I was little, I would always ask her questions, ask her to tell me stories. So I've been fascinated by the stories that we find in mythology and religions, but also and the wisdom that is reflected in those stories, because they are complex, right? Ravan is a complex character as well, right? And Ravan can be represented in so many different ways as well. Like in some communities, he's a hero, right? So this counter narrative. So I play with a lot of that also in my stories. Like, what is a hero? What is a villain? And what is God and what is not God? So yeah.
And why do you think it's important for you to include that element of spirituality in your books? Because I mean, there are a lot of, because there is also this concern that, you know, what if I maybe consider writing a little more about spirituality? Will my book do well as well? Will enough people will it be appealing to the masses? Have you ever had those concerns while writing any book, for that matter?
I don't think so. I think what I've been more concerned with is that some of the stories are very sexually explicit. And then there's spirituality, right? I think very often spiritual traditions, spiritual people split off the sexual. And I don't, you know. I think anything can be holy. So let me read something else, if that's okay. So this is also holy. I think when something is done with awareness and love, it can be sacred, right? That's also an idea we find in a lot of traditions. I think that when something is done with loving awareness, it can become sacred. Everyday actions, also sex. We undress and lie down on the bed. We kiss each other everywhere. I kiss his forehead, his eyes, his nose, his neck, his shoulders, his pigmentation spots, his nipples, and his navel. I kiss his cock, pull back the foreskin and kiss the glands. He kisses mine. He turns me around on my stomach and kisses my hole. He kisses the small of my back and moves all the way up to the nape. You should write an erotic about us, he whispers in my ear. I will. He turns my head and kisses me on my lips. While his tongue is in my mouth, I sense his cock against my hole, and slowly he enters me from behind. You okay? He asks. More than okay. I almost come like this, with him taking me from behind. Then I manage to turn around without his cock leaving me. While I'm on my back, our eyes meet and a hand pushes the full length and breadth of his cock inside me. He stays like this for a moment, filling me completely. It pulsates inside me. His pulse, my pulse, difficult to know which is which. We're almost one, he says. Do you feel it? Yeah, I say, my heart expanding, tears welling up in my eyes. So yes, and it's very interesting because I can feel a bit, you know, of shame or embarrassment while I'm reading this out loud in a public space as well, and that's very interesting because I think people think that I'm shameless. I'm not. I have a lot of shame, a lot of unhealthy shame, you could say as well, because we are part of society. You know, even in Norway, there's not that much sex positivity that all that shame will just go. But as an author, as an artist, and as a public figure, I can't be governed by that shame. And I think especially when it comes to gay sex, it's so important to celebrate it, because that is what has been, you know, that is what has been considered sinful, or what makes us sinful or criminal and sick and all of that in the eyes of certain people throughout history. So I want to celebrate it, and I also want to say, you know, look, this is also a spiritual practice. When it's done with love and awareness, also playfulness, right? I think playfulness is also a very spiritual attitude. And then we're only humans, so sometimes like there is that shredded dates, which I think you also want to talk about. Sometimes we go on dates, sometimes we do Grindr, sometimes we have random sex, and it's not really satisfying, or we don't know how to commit and all of that, but we're trying our best, we're human.
Has there ever been an issue when you take a book of this sort to an editor, and because you just mentioned that not even Norway is not as open to talking about sex and sexuality the way the book talks about it. Tell us a little more about your experience taking the book to the editor.
So the original editor and publisher of this book is called Team Angelica, and I'd like to just say that out loud as well, because Team Angelica is a queer of color-centric press in London. And they have some amazing books, also a book by a Somali author, queer author, and my editor there was just very, very, you know, positive and happy about me being very explicit, and you don't need to you know, be proper or whatever to be okay with a wider crowd or something, no. So that was very helpful. And then also in India, so the book is also now, the rights for the book have been bought by Tara Press, and is available at Barrison's bookstores. Yeah, so, and the same thing with my editor and publisher there, he's very, you know, no, this should be talked about. He's not a queer person, but you know, there's a lot of support for that, I think. And I think that is the sense I get. I'm really happy about in India as well, you know, that I feel there's so much change happening when it comes to understanding LGBTQ issues, but also I feel a little bit more sex positivity, you know?
Yeah, I'm glad actually you talk about that in the book, because at this point in time, with the situation that is, and with the government that is in power, it's very difficult. Censorship has actually become massive, and it's very difficult to talk about issues like this in popular culture films. So I think when a book of this sort really comes in, it really gives some hope to people when you talk about intersectionality, when you talk about kids growing up in smaller villages, them having access to a book of this sort really can probably give them a certain sense of hope as well. And did you ever have that in mind as well while writing the book, that maybe there are going to be a lot of Indians from smaller 2-tier cities or 3-tier cities reading your book, and how would they be perceiving this experience as well?
I think that's a really good question. I hope a lot of people will read the book and that something will resonate with them, but I'm also very aware of my position and my perspective, right? I'm an urban person, born and bred and also living in a big city, and normally in India I stay in like Bombay, Delhi, like these big cities, so I'm very, I have a lot of respect and humility in terms of like, I don't know what it is like to be, you know, gay in the village. Like, I don't. The only gay in the village. I don't. Well, actually,
but you know about the langos.
I know about
you know enough.
I know. Yeah. So, I wonder if, do you want to also talk about the grinder and the shredded dates part?
Yes, I was really. Yeah, I was actually coming to that. Yeah. I think you should probably read a certain excerpt from shredded dates. Yeah.
So this is being on Grindr in Bombay. Okay. He is good looking. V-shaped and muscled in a tight t-shirt, a nice smile, a perfectly symmetrical face. He says hi and something more in a baritone bordering on bass. My hand feels good in his, skin against skin. I pick up a masculine scent, woody and spicy. There's already chemistry between us. We sit down facing each other, people on both sides of us, and look at the menu. Anything you recommend, I ask? All their drinks are good, he says. I can't choose, too many choices. What are you having, I ask? A double gin and tonic. Maybe I should have one of their signatures. Acharoska sounds different, I look at him. I think Indian lime pickle sounds too much in a drink, but go ahead, he says. Maybe you're right, I say. I'll go for something safer, maybe just rum and coke. He calls for the waiter. No, I think I'll have the same as you, double gin and tonic, easy. He orders for us. You know how the American ideal is freedom of choice, I say? The more choices, the better, right? I guess it's increasingly the ideology across the world, including India. He nods and looks at me attentively. I recently read these studies that suggest the opposite, that the more alternatives we are presented with, the less happy and more discontented we become. Like just now, I chose that double gin and tonic, but while I'm drinking it, I'll wonder whether the lime pickle drink was in fact better. If they'd only had that one signature drink, I wouldn't have had to spend energy choosing in the first place and later worrying whether it was the right choice. I would have just enjoyed that drink. He looks at me, baffled perhaps, I don't know what he's thinking. I plow on. I probably spend more time choosing where and what to drink or eat than it takes the average traditional Indian to choose a spouse out of the alternatives given to them. I laugh a little bit. He does too, perhaps only because my laughter was a cue. At least he did. He joined me. He didn't leave me alone with my research rant and overly wordy half-jokes. Anyway, he might as well get to know my particular neurosis from the start, not least my issues with choosing and wanting to understand things in depth, the two possibly connected. But you seem to be able to choose quickly, I add. I know what I want, he says, and looks me directly in the eyes. I get a hard-on and smile and lower my eyes. So that's the beginning of one Grindr date in Bombay. And then it's called shredded dates, right? So it's like, it's the issues of commitment and all of that. And some of the things that, you know, is already raised here by the main character, the protagonist, you know, the more choices we have, we think it's better, the more choices we have. But there is actually research, psychological research, to show, you know, we have a lot of choices, we spend so much energy choosing, and then later having chosen, we wonder, was it the right choice? Because there are so many other choices. So it's like, same thing with Grindr, right? When will we ever say, okay, this guy? You know?
Yeah.
So it's these shredded dates, like lots and lots of dates. So it's excitement and something there, but it's I think the blessings and the curses of Grindr and these dating apps more generally, I think. Yeah.
You've spoken a lot about Grindr in the book as well. How is your experience using Grindr a little different in India than it is abroad? Because I mean, I've observed it personally that it's very you seldom find non-toxic men on the application in India, and that's just a personal experience. I'm sure other people must have had very valid experiences, but it's sometimes a little exhausting to find the right person, especially in India, and especially when you are brown skinned. And how has your experience have been using the application in India or maybe abroad as well? Yeah.
Yeah, so maybe that has something to do with the fact that, you know, maybe I'm lighter skinned or whatever, I don't know, but also just being new in a city, you know, immediately, whether it's India or somewhere else, when you're new in a city, then boom, you're very interesting, right? Very often. So I've had, I guess, mixed experiences with Grindr in India, but I also met, you know, I met a guy who I had a short relationship with, which was very good. I've met friends through Grindr. I've had some good lovers through Grindr. It's been a mixed experience, I think. Yeah.
And in the book, you also mentioned how Delhi, you have a love-hate relationship with Delhi, where you really, of course, enjoy Delhi and the elegance of Delhi. But the fact that Delhi is also a city that perhaps is not the safest city in the world, and that you've been groped and stalked in the city as well. Would you like to talk a little more about that as well?
Yeah,
how
well,
safe is it for you? Basically?
Yeah. So I mean. Personally, I haven't had that many bad experiences in Delhi, to be honest. So, so it's more based a little bit, I guess, on especially female friends. Yeah. And I think, you know, that's also really important to remember. I think since it was Monday, I think 7 years ago, Nirbhaya case. So yeah. So, but I'm also really impressed by, you know, the reaction to that also in Delhi. So.
And the resilience.
And the resilience, yes, definitely, yeah.
You also talk about the elitist experience that you had with a literary individual. I mean, that you met at an event. Is it often that you find that elitist crowd in the circle of literature? Because you were a very popular author. You've written books abroad, over here as well, and I'm sure you meet a lot of editors. You meet a lot of people, poets and authors from around the country. And is your experience a little more? How is it basically? In all these countries.
So I mean, I really appreciate it when somebody, you know, just writes to me, and it's whoever. Like I've written a book that's called Poetry is Possible, and that's a book of poems. And this queer person from India just reached out to me and said, you know, this makes me feel possible, you know? And I'm just like, that's so beautiful. Like, more than any kind of literary critique or whatever, I don't care, you know? That connection, and that's something I think you know, makes it legitimate for us to still speak of LGBTQ literature as well, because we need to find a community and all of that. But I think in some circles, and what you're referring to, which is a scene from Fucking Delhi, which is based again closely on my experience, was going to a literary event, and then it's very there's very hardcore policing there. So it's, you know, I'm very much for diversity, you know, but diversity doesn't happen by saying, oh, you know, cis gay men have been in power. Now they should not be represented at all. Now it should just be like certain other people. That's not diversity either. That's just inverting the hierarchy. So I think real inclusion is a little bit more difficult, because it also takes like, okay, we all have wounds, let's breathe, you know? And then how do we move forward in our activism and inclusion in literary circles and in queer activism more generally?
Yeah, I think we should let you read probably one of your favorite excerpts from the book, and if there's anything else that you would really like to add as well.
Okay. I'll read, I think this story was, so several of these stories have been published in an earlier version on Gaylaxy magazine. And I'm really, really grateful to Gaylaxy and to Sukti who's here for providing us with a platform like that. It's been so important for me, and I've met people through it. And it's been so important to have a platform for, you know, LGBTQ writing generally, and media, news, discussion. Yeah. So this story was first published in an earlier version on Gaylaxy. It's called...
And Gaylaxy completes 10 years as well.
Yes.
I think we should give a huge round of
Yes,
applause.
let's do that.
10 big years.
So this story is called Surya. I went to a party. Some of the guests were complaining about Modi. Others were discussing a recent but distant terrorist attack. Everyone was trying to look sexy and seem intellectual, in English, while drinking chandan, a lot of chandan. At some point I left. It was still early. I blamed it on the jet lag. I found a taxi. The driver unlocked the front passenger side door so I could climb into the seat next to him. I tried to open the door behind so I could have some privacy. But the back door was locked, and he didn't open it, so I got in next to him. It's uncomfortable to be so close and not speak. I look out through the side window without really seeing what's there. I pick up the scent of tobacco and something sweet and floral inside the car. Maybe he smokes. I hear him singing softly to himself. Maybe he does that when he's by himself, or when he feels lonely, even with passengers here. I don't know the song. Then he pulls over. 8 minutes there, he says. Okay. He gets out of the car and disappears down a dimly lit narrow side street. It's not exactly a busty, I think, but it's certainly not somewhere the people from the party would live. He probably needs to take a piss. He's gone for a couple of minutes, then he reappears. Peshab, I ask when he gets back in. Nahi, sir. He opens his hand. A small lump of hashish, almost black in his palm. I look at him. He's young and handsome, and though his eyes are slightly bloodshot, I'm sure many men would want to have sex with him. I wonder if he does that. Maybe for the extra money? He asks me something. Do I smoke, or perhaps whether I want to smoke? I tell him no. Stumbling along in my broken Hindi, I ask him about the hashish, the quality, the price, small talk. He tells me that this is enough for 10 joints. He smokes one every night before he goes to bed. It gives him energy, he tells me. His Hindi is excellent. I ask where he's from. UP, sir. We're talking now. That is, it's mostly him talking. I pick up words here and there and try to understand from the context and his body language. Perhaps it's good my Hindi is so bad. It levels out the relationship. And no matter how clumsily I say the few things that I do, he doesn't laugh at me. I still wish my Hindi were better, though. I want to really understand what he's telling me. He comes from a village, I gather, as we drive along. His parents and younger siblings are still there. It's difficult, he tells me, his voice cracking a little. He hasn't been back to see them since he moved here 3 years ago. I ask him where in the city he stays. He sleeps in the back of the car, he tells me. I glance over at him. He's wearing a clean white shirt. It's almost shining against his skin. For a moment I wonder if I'm invading his privacy, but I keep asking questions. Where does he shower and clean himself and his clothing? And then, what's his dream? God, why did I do that? It's like some kitschy film thing. But why not? Everyone has dreams. To help his parents and younger siblings, he says. I wonder if he doesn't also want something for himself. No, only helping them, he insists. Suddenly, a Neruda line lands in my mind. I want to do with you what spring does with cherry trees. And then I realize I don't even know his name. Aapka naam kya hai? Surya. Surya, the sun. He asks for mine. Ram. Very good, he says in English. I feel more connected to him after the exchange of names. I want to share something more with him, where I'm from, what life is like there, Uttar Europe. I start talking about how the sun is slowly disappearing there now, how in winter there is hardly any sun, only white snow and dark skies. We live like that for months, I tell him. It's difficult, but then comes spring and summer. Hamesha Surya, 24-hour sun. Acha, he says. He smiles, and when Surya smiles, his eyes light up. I'm attracted to him. But I don't think it's sexual, I don't know. Somehow he feels more like a brother to me. Yahan left, I say. Surya turns left and continues talking, but I have to interrupt again. Yahan right. It's coming to an end. What would it have been like if I had smoked a joint with him? Ye mera hotel, I say. I'm a little embarrassed about the hotel, quite upscale, but he doesn't seem to notice. I look at the meter, 375 rupees. I find a 500 rupee note in my pocket and give it to him. Rest is for you. Nahi bhai. No brother, too much he tells me. He tries to give it back to me, his hands covering mine. Suddenly I have tears in my eyes, and I don't know why. In a way, this is so degrading, me giving him this money, forcing it on him. In a way, he's so beautiful for refusing to take it. Maybe it's also him calling me brother instead of sir that makes me so sentimental. Maybe it's the chandan I drank at the party and the jet lag kicking in. Regardless of the reason, I have tears in my eyes now, and Surya takes the money. He asks if I have an Indian number. I don't. And I don't ask for his. He says that maybe we will meet again anyway. I take his hand briefly and our eyes meet. Then I open the door and get out.
I think, Vikram, while I was reading the book, there was something very interesting that I noticed, that the book in a lot of ways is not actually limited in any ways just to the community. So in the audience today we also have people who are allies to the community. And did you ever have that in your head while writing the book, that it should be accessible to everyone who's reading it and everybody should be able to connect to the book on various different levels?
So, I mean, I'm gay or queer, I guess I would say, and I've read a lot of literature that's been written by straight people and that have straight characters in it, right? So if it's about life, then, you know, I can relate. This is also about life. I don't want to be overly accommodating though. I think it's really important because there isn't that much queer literature, especially Indian queer literature. So I think it's important to have, you know, okay, this is my literature. These are experiences I can really relate to, like, and then, you know, other people, straight people, if they can make a little bit of effort, then I'm sure they can also relate, you know. But it's the majority. So we've always had to make a little bit of effort and relate. It comes very easy for us because we've had to do that, right? But I think it's about life, you know. These are human experiences. It plays out in slightly different forms, but it's about longing, it's about love. So.
And I think I have to mention here that the book really creates such beautiful imageries. We really need to have an Indian filmmaker making this someday, because it's really, really well written. And I hope that a lot of people in India definitely buy the book and definitely celebrate sexuality the way the book celebrates it. We'll open the audience for questions if they have any. I'm sure they have a lot of interesting questions to ask.
I just want to remind. Okay. So thank you for the conversation. It was amazing, and I just wanted to say that I think the book is very honest. That's the way I can put it. The best way. I mean, what I've been able to understand. It's very, very honest, and I think if you are one of those people who reads literature, who reads the spoken word or the written word in an open mind, you'll be able to connect with it because it's very honest, and I think it's somewhat or the other actually justifies the title very deeply. And something which I could really connect with when you were talking about the love-making scene, the entire passage. You said that you actually had tears in your eyes, and I could actually connect with that because I've actually had personal experience at least once in my life when somebody touches you in such a perfect way that it's almost divine, and you feel that so deeply. So I just wanted to tell you that congratulations on this. Thank you so much for writing it, and thank you for this incredible weekend.
One question at least from Sukhdeep. Sukhdeep is quite the grinder person over here. He's used grinder in all different ways in all different parts of the world.
No, my question is not on grinder. So I was going to ask Vikram more on Mohini books, and the reason he started the book because this book is published by Mohini books, right?
No.
Oh, not this.
No, sorry.
But in general, you have started Mohini books. And do you think, because I was talking with Nimat Salat a few months back, he has had his book, The Carpet Weaver, released in India, and he had a real tough time selling it to a publisher in the West. So do you think, I'm not sure who the publisher for this book in general is, but do you think this book would have been really hard for you to publish if you were looking for a publisher in Norway or the West?
Yes, so the publisher for this book, so Mohini Books is a publisher that I and a friend, we just started, which is it's queer operated, Oslo based. So, you know, if you're writing and if you're queer or it's queer themed, then please get in touch with us. It's mohini.no. This book, though, was published by Team Angelica. So Team Angelica is a queer of color-centric press in London. And, you know, I think my editor was very welcoming of the material and everything here. I think it would be much more difficult. I have been in touch with some other bigger mainstream publishers, and they found, you know, parts of it, sometimes also the sex, you know, it's like, oh, a little bit too much sex or something with the sex, and then I'm like, well, then fuck it, you know, I will go somewhere else. I'm not going to make this more like proper or appropriate for you and your kind of mainstream, straight or whatever audience. So I think that does matter. It's important that we still have, you know, queer operated or queer centric presses, magazines, and different spaces. I think that's still very important because something, even though LGBTQ now has become very, you know, much the kind of the trend, it's only, I think, still mostly certain representations, right? So we still need to have, and it's also nice to have our own community, I think, right? It's nice, I think, to have our own community as well as normalize and to invite others and be invited into other communities. I also like to have my queer community, that there is a publisher, there is queer literature, there is, yeah.
It's just so real in everything that he does and what he says, and just kind of caught me off guard is I had gone into this thing where I was questioning stuff and I kind of tried to play the game or whatever, and that was the same day I was starting to think about it, and then he just kind of just said all of it, like, and it just instantly made me very safe. Yeah. So it's kind of this really real, spiritual relationship that I really love. Yeah.
Just out of curiosity, because you have a Norwegian heritage, if I'm right, and Vikram, as he's already mentioned, that he's had a dual heritage. And how is it that you connect with each other's stories that way as well? And have you ever had any conflict as well?
No. Yeah, no, I don't know, what connected is just, I mean, it's two people, no?
I think Vikram will talk about conflict.
Yeah.
But we've also had,
there.
but we've also had conflicts
Yeah,
about,
yeah.
because, you know, white and
I mean,
white privilege.
we've definitely had white and black conversations. And
Yeah.
stuff. And, yeah, no, we have.
Yeah.
And it's very enlightening.
Yeah.
It is, and it's. I mean, we really try to see each other's viewpoints and yeah, and like learn from it. Like we're both spiritually learners, and we want to learn from each other. So it's yeah. I don't know if we're going to go into details about
But I think being with difference, you know, in the world there is difference, right? And how are we with difference? In some ways, it would have been easier for me to be with another queer person of color, because that person would also have then experiences of racism, would understand certain things better, you know, immediately, like instinctively. But then the world is also, we have to live with each other. And I think like being with us as two different people, we can grow, we can try to understand each other, as Daniel was saying. And again, I'm going back to Mirabai. She was dancing with and singing with Muslims, with people of all communities and castes. And this is love. That's the radical force of love. That we are with difference, and how can we be with that difference, and how can we grow, right? It's very nice to be all comfortable sometimes, and we do need that as well, not just challenge ourselves. We need to be comfortable. That's why I also think it's important with queer spaces. We have our community. But then it's also important to go across those boundaries, to be, you know, love is radical. So to cross those differences, to really try to understand and respect and grow, that's how we grow. We grow when we meet something new. We don't grow when everything is the old and familiar and what we already think, and you know, that's no growth.
Yeah, and I was just thinking about an incident a few months ago. We were standing in front of the mirrors, and we look so different. Like, it's not just the skin color. I mean, you know, it's the hair, it's the, you know, whatever. It's the height, it's the build, it's everything. It's so completely different. And
you have to come up here so people can see you now.
I just love that because it's yeah. So we were just standing in front of the mirrors, and we were just saying, we both said that we just love that we look so different. Yeah, from each other.
Yeah.
Yeah. Any more questions, folks? We have Bhuban here. How can we not have a? Yeah, of course. Please go ahead. Please go ahead. How can we not have a question from Bhuban? I can just help you pass the mic.
I think I can probably project. So I have sort of a three-part question / critique of your work and loving this without having read your book, so I apologize in advance and I look forward to reading it. Don't you think that this work in some ways reproduces a particular kind of Orientalist trope about, you know, Indian spirituality and sexuality? Like it just kind of sort of recirculates those notions around the sort of the Indophilia of the East, right? Like I wonder if that's a critique that you can speak to. Secondly, I think when we first met, you told me that you were a Gestalt psychotherapist. So I was curious to know how that fits into your literary work, and if you could talk a little bit more about who your queer literary influence is, or who's influenced you in terms of queer authors.
Sure, thank you. Really appreciate those questions and comments. So first of all, yes, I'm a Gestalt therapist. I'm associate professor of Gestalt psychotherapy. So I teach and lecture and research Gestalt psychotherapy. And Gestalt psychotherapy, the reason that profession I felt that calling is because Gestalt is all about awareness. It's about awareness and dialogue. So it's not me as a psychotherapist being in some expert position. My training is in awareness, to be more aware of what's going on in my body, my mind, my emotions when I'm meeting a certain person, and then also becoming more aware of, you know, that person. And then increasing awareness, we believe, can help facilitate change. And it happens through dialogue, right? And I think that is clearly reflected in the book as well, because, you know, it's my highest ambition and intention in life generally, as a writer, therapist, partner, friend, whatever person, is loving awareness. So I want to be as loving and as aware as I possibly can. And I think my editor also said, you know, there's something about the people or the different characters in this book. They seem to observe people so well, and there's something there. And he said, maybe, does that have something to do with your psychotherapy training? And without analyzing people, and I said, yes. Well, that's really interesting that you pick up on that, because there is no analysis in Gestalt therapy. It's all about being aware and trying to see the whole, not reducing, right? And not like explaining it in some very reductionistic way. So, so I think there is some link there. Yeah, definitely. About the Indophilia or the Orientalism, that's a good question. I'll be very honest with you, because I haven't thought about that. I think in the West, or in Norway, which I can speak mostly about, there is a notion of India as being either terribly poor and has to be helped and is dirty and poor, right? That's one notion. And then the other notion is India is very, very spiritual and we go there for spirituality. So the India that's represented in this book is not like that. It's an India where, you know, people meet for these drinks, grinder date, at a social in Bombay, okay? But it's also in India where this person has this meeting with Surya, the taxi driver. So there, I would also like to say, and I'm very clear about this, there's also this whole now identity politics, which is very important, you know, that, okay, we have different identities, we need to be aware of our positions and what we can speak from. So my position and perspective is someone of dual heritage, born and bred in Norway. So I've been very clear that, you know, I've had Indian friends read these stories before they were published. I've had when I write, when there's a story that concerns a Dalit person, I have Dalit friends that read them, female friends who read, because I think it's very important as a writer to be aware of my position and my perspective, but also writing is also imagination and creation, right? So, and that I think that touches on this whole idea of identity politics and what is Orientalism, what is speaking about the other and our own position. Because I do think that it's a very difficult balance for everybody. But I think we can't get too stuck in this, like, I can only speak out of what I've experienced, that's it, period. Even when I'm speaking out of my own experience, as I said, memory, and I know this very well as a psychotherapist, memory is something that happens here and now. It's created here and now, and it's a very creative process, right? So I think it's about, for me, it's about trying to be aware and then respectful and be in dialogue again. So I've shared the stories with different people, but you know, some people may find it offensive still, for good reasons perhaps, and some people may find it Orientalist, I don't know. But I think it's a different India than this typical either very poor and dirty and needs to be helped, or this spiritual place where we go to seek, you know, so something, salvation that we don't have in the West.
Your influences?
Sorry? Oh yes, so my queer, wow. So yes.
We also had a discussion about
Yes,
this.
so I have, okay, let me think. So there's several queer authors. I would actually say, I would really recommend another book by Team Angelica, which is this Somali author, which I first read. He's called Usman Diriye. His book is called Fairy Tales for Lost Children. That's the short story collection. And when I first read it, this is a Somali queer person, and some of the stories are going on in, you know, refugee camps in Kenya, in Somalia, or in London, in the UK, and some of the stories are very sexually explicit, and I was like, wow, I have never read anything like this before, and it's well written. That's how and then I had to look up, who's this publisher? And that was how I found Team Angelica. And then there are other queer authors, like, you know, I've read many of the Indian, like Raj Rao, The Boyfriend. I also really like Vasudendra Mohanaswamy, I think is very beautiful. So, I mean, there's more and more contemporary Indian authors as well, right? Who else? Somebody in the diaspora, what is his name? He's written a short story collection called The Quarantine. I'll have to think what exactly his name is now, but I'll let you know when I think of it. But then I also like Manto, right? Like, he's not queer, but I mean that love for Bombay and the desire and the senses and his kind of, I don't know, definitely not straightness is like something that really appeals to me. James Baldwin, of course, James Baldwin. Yes, so I guess several, I think. Yeah. These are some of the ones that I think of now, just immediately off the top of my head. Yeah.
Yeah, I think just adding to that, I think maybe you should also mention about who your queer influences have been growing up as well. I think we had a very short discussion about it, a discussion about it actually, because like for me in India growing up, like Freddie Mercury was like was the it person to be, and he's had an incredible amount of influence, especially when we're talking about pop culture. And who was your pop culture influence growing up? In the
yeah,
queer
so
space?
I'm not very pop culture, right? I'm really bad with like the names of actors, and I don't, you know, I can enjoy a good film, but then I don't remember the names or anything like that. And also when I was growing up, it's like we were talking about this, you know, you're quite a lot younger than me, and you've grown up in India, and you know, you came out very early, you had such different process compared to mine. You know, I was closeted for a long time in Norway, which was secular, all of that. But there was widespread heterosexism, you know, lots of it, like, you know, it was not, I did not want to be gay. I really did not want to be gay. And there were no queer role models that I could see. None. Right? It was, okay, Will and Grace. That was it, right? That was probably in the, whatever, 90s or something, right? And even then, it's very interesting now because they've come out with a new season, and then they've at least included some black or people of color. Because there was nothing of that, but that I didn't even think about, you know, when I was growing up. Of course everybody was white.
Yeah.
That I didn't even think about, but at least there was a gay person. And I remember watching Will and Grace with my mother, and that she loved it, and she was laughing. And I think that was somehow reassuring, or that did something to me in my whole process, that, okay, that's one thing that I can remember just straight away. But I think gay people have been caricatured, not just in Bollywood films, but in, you know, in Western media as well, a lot. So I did not grow up with a lot of queer role models, no.
I'm so glad you mentioned that because I think it's such a departure for a lot of us Indians here who grew up believing that countries abroad, especially Europe, are so much more progressive than where we come from. And I think for a lot of us, especially queer people in India, they always say that, okay, maybe I don't think I can come out right now. I think even if they can afford to come out, they choose to not because they believe that, you know, our country in general is not as progressive as other countries have been. And I think when you put out a perspective of this sort, it sort of homogenizes the situation for all of us queer people around the world. So no matter where you come from, I think we all have that same amount of struggle. And when we start throwing away our problems into a heap, we want to take it back because we all have the same amount of problems to deal with.
Yeah, I think, of course, it's human nature to compare, right? But I think we have to compare what is equal. Like what we can say is everybody suffers, everybody wants happiness. In that we can say about everybody. Everything else is just different like forms of suffering, different forms of happiness. And it's so difficult to compare that, I think, because it's like, it's a mixed picture growing up. You know, as I said, it was very white, it was very heterosexist. Yeah. And then we've talked a little bit about this, you know, before, that, you know, when it comes to, I sent in a picture because Daniel is here with his twin brother, Alexander, who's also gay, by the way, and single. So I sent it because I was booking train tickets for us, and then I sent a screenshot to them because they just arrived yesterday. I sent a screenshot of, you know, when you select male, female, or trans, and I said, look at this, how great is this? Because that is happening in India now, right? Slowly, slowly. But that is part of, that is the law in India now. You have to have 3 genders, right? In anything that's like official, etc. In Norway, there's nothing like that. No, you know? So the idea of like a 3rd gender is so foreign to Norwegian culture. So it's like, it's a mixed picture, I think, all of these things. As a therapist, I've also facilitated groups for trans people. And I remember especially, it was so strong for me because it was over a summer, and one person towards the end of the group, he said, I'm so grateful for this group, not just for what's happened here, but also for it making this group made me, you know, have to leave my house at least once a week throughout the summer so I could get some sun on my skin walking to the office. Otherwise, this person would not have left their house. Because there was so much fear and anxiety about like being bullied, about people looking, all of this stuff going on. So, you know, yeah, it's mixed, I think. It's mixed.
I think we'll take any more questions if we have.
There's also, I also brought some Norwegian biscuits, Christmas biscuits, ginger biscuits, and there's tea, and I mean, we can also continue talking just informally.
Vikram's here, so you can get his copy signed as well. This is a golden opportunity, go grab it. And get a lot of pictures with him, a beautiful author here. So.
And I just want to say thank you so much to Anvesh as well, to Sukhdeep and Gaylaxy. But Anvesh he's been doing his exams. Up until yesterday he was doing his exams. And tomorrow he's shifting to Bangalore. And then he's doing this, he's taking time to do this. I think I'm so grateful, thank you.
It's important, and I'd like to add it here, that it's important for queer people of color to stand in solidarity with other queer people and especially other queer people of color. So because we are all fighting the same battle, and if we all stand together, that's the only way we can find and perhaps build a utopian world that I've always believed that we can. So thank you so much, Vikram, for making your way all the way from Norway to India.
So yes, I have some books, if you want to have one signed, buy one, and then there's some biscuits and tea, and let's just be informal.